Bam! MC is in the house. What's up, folks? My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I'm here every week on Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time, taking a topic deep dive and having a good time while doing it. We have a pretty good topic prepared today, have some content I want to share. Before we do that, let's take care of the housekeeping, as we always do. If you guys are not getting my emails, link is down below in the description, or you can go to masterchimletter.com and you'll have the sign in there. Opt into those emails. They're free. Send them every day. Today, I actually sent a couple of them. I was feeling a little fired up this morning. Decided to send an extra one. But I could get a little bit more expansive on some of these topics, in the emails, where, as usual, and you guys know, I always have to toe the line to some extent when I'm borrowing somebody's platform to share my message. So, what do we got going on here? All right. We got Jesse. What's going on, Jesse? Yarn Saxon, good to see you. Aaron, good to see you, Dawn. As you guys are watching, feel free to give me a shout in the comments. Another thing, and I forget to do this every week, if you guys, because we usually have the same group of people, some of you guys watch on YouTube, some of you guys watch on Facebook. Wherever you are, make sure you like the post or the video that it's actually on. D, what up? It's my little brother there. If you guys could see, I think he's watching on Facebook. So what are we talking about today? I sent out an email before, and as usual, you guys know I tend to have fun with these thumbnails and stuff. And today we have, what's up, Jamie? Today I put a guy climbing, up a ladder with a sort of shit-eating grin on his face, and he's climbing out of a ditch. And I included the phrase "happy idiot." And there are a lot of people who I would label a happy idiot in the circumstance that I was depicting in that image. But let me break that down, because it's not exactly on the nose. Sometimes we have ditches that we dig because of our inability to stay disciplined, to stay focused. What's up, Johnny? Sometimes we have these interactions with some sort of stressor. The stressor puts us in a different state. In that different state, we affect all sorts of circumstances in our lives. And then we go beyond that to either the first state or a new state. And then we have to sort of dig ourselves out of the ditch that we've dug, which, escaping the ditches we dug, obviously, is the title of today's talk. I wrote in the email, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here. I want to do things somewhat linearly because I did prepare a model that I wanted to share. And let's do that now. So in the email this morning, I wrote that there are 4 zones of state. 4 zones of state. And it's a very simple framework to allow somebody to identify the current state that they're in. Probably worthwhile, valuable if I define state, right? So state is the emotional status of our energy that predicts how we are going to interact with our environment. If we say that somebody is in a high state, a very common synonym to that is a good mood. Like somebody's in a high state in a good mood, and that's not necessarily accurate, or at least it's not all encompassing. It's not a sort of a parallel, not the parallel we think it is. Being in a productive state or a high state means we are more effective at pursuing our mission. Most of the time, I'm comfortable saying, we will also be in a good mood when we are in that elevated state. But sometimes the elevated state is a heightened level of focus, of awareness, of commitment, of intent. But the whole context of saying that the state is elevated is the outcomes that we're able to generate when we're in it. By contrast, a low state is not necessarily a bad mood. Sometimes we could be seemingly in a good mood while in a bad state. And it's a bad state, not because of the mood that we're in necessarily in the way that people understand that, but it's really what are we currently capable of pursuing or producing in pursuit of our mission. You could say a good state is a productive state. A bad state is a destructive state. And that's the sort of discernment I want you guys to make between a good mood and a good state. Just because everybody is happy doesn't mean that they're worth a shit. It doesn't mean that they're doing a good job, right? It doesn't mean that you're doing a good job just because you're in a good mood. Now, obviously, I'm also the guy that says there's never reason to not be in a good mood, because being in some sort of emotionally destructive state will compromise our ability to produce, right? Will compromise our ability to be effective. So I'm hoping I'm making sense so far. So let's get into John Wiley, what up? Judge Cohen, what's up? Corey, what's up, my man? Good to see you. Let's get into the 4 zones of state. The 4 zones of state. And it's going to be very simple. It's going to be your default state, your elevated state, your reduced state, and your after state. Now, what do I mean by this? What you are walking around with, what you wake up in, what the average level of state that you maintain during the course of the day. And this is an ongoingly, I don't know if that's a word, but it is going to continually be updated. So this is not something that's set years ago or something that you made a decision to do. It's not the way that this works. This is subconsciously driven, and it's something that is sort of like a running average, we could say. Your default state is the one that people understand you to be. It's how people expect you to be when they see you. It's how you consider yourself to be on average. It's what you're known for. It could be, your personality as coined by other people, or, oh, he's always in a good mood. Oh, he's always in a fun, he's always making jokes. He's always having a good time. Or this guy's always miserable. This guy's a fucking mope. Or like, these labels tend to reflect what people see as our default state. Right? So default state is the one that you're walking around with. It's the one that, without any sort of conscious thinking, is where the equilibrium that your state finds. So that is the default state. Then we have the elevated state. The elevated state is when, and remember what I said in the beginning, the elevated state is you are more productive. It could be a bout of inspiration, motivation. It could be an elated, sympathetic nervous system driven state, the fight or flight. You're capable of more. But it is more productive, more capable, usually more energy than your default, right? So we have the default, we have the elevated. Then we have the reduced, right? So the reduced state is where we are less productive. Usually, in most cases, being in a reduced state, you're going to have less energy. You're going to be preoccupied with something in abstraction that disconnects you from fully engaging what's in front of you in the real world. We've all been there, being in a bad mood, some sort of depressive state where we're not paying attention to the opportunities as they present themselves. This is indicative of a reduced state. Comparatively, a reduced state is also lower than your default state. Even if you're known as a mope, being in a reduced state is you're even mopier than that, right? You're even less capable than that. And then finally, we have the after state. Now, the after state, I decided on after state instead of post state, because post state's just hard to say and nobody's going to understand it, right? So after state. So after state refers to the default state post elevated or reduced state. So let's say you are at a 0. That is your equilibrium. That is your default state. And something happens, you get fired up, you hear something, good news, or there's a challenge that presents itself and it makes you focus more intently. And let's say you're at a 0, you're not out of 10. Whatever had you elevate your state is now going to wear off, let's say, and as you go back down towards your equilibrium, let's say that you are now at where you had a 0 before, you're now at a 1. that one is eventually going to be your new default. Eventually, it'll go back down to zero, assuming that there are no changes in your habits that occurred during the elevated state. So if you keep doing the same thing, eventually you'll go back to where your equilibrium was. Similarly, if you are in a reduced state, you are at zero, now you're at -10. Whatever event brought you down to -10, it starts to wane, it dissipates, you start engaging, keep it moving. Now you're back up, and now you're at -1. Eventually, it'll go back to zero if you go back to those habits and rituals that you were doing prior to the reduced state. If the reduced state affected those habits and rituals, then that will eventually become your new default. So we have basically your default, elevated, reduced, and then after states, right? So those are the 4 zones. At any point in the day, any moment of your life, you are in one of those zones. You could be in a good mood with one thing and something else is brought up and you're in a bad mood. And that could affect your overall state. But what we're walking around with is what I want you to attach this framework to, not the individual relationship with individual stressors or circumstances. It's like in my job, I'm at an elevated state right now, but at home, I'm at a reduced state. And that's not the way this is. It's what you are walking around with right now. We are going to, because what I'm trying to do is disincentivize maintaining the relationships with abstractions. This framework's intent is to put you in the moment, to make an individual accountable for how he feels right then and there. All right. So I hope that makes sense. So before we get to the next question, Aaron writes, your quote for today is perfect for this talk. Like being a winner, being a loser is a collection of habits. That's right. And that was on today's email. So the next question that I put in the email is, what are the common obstacles men face when managing them? And them in reference to the zones, the 4 zones of state. If you are somebody who is very malleable in your energy, and being malleable, having your energy be very malleable, is what other people would call being sensitive. If you are very sensitive, it's not going to take much for you to have a reaction. Some people have allergies, right? Some people are allergic to, they have to, I forget that, some people who are allergic to latex, they got to wear the other material of gloves. I don't know what the other fucking material is. For some reason, my brain keeps saying silk. And then my other part of my brain is going, Justin, it's not silk. People don't put on silk fucking gloves because they're allergic. You know what I mean. But if they were to put this on, this glove that they're allergic to, they would have a reaction. Some people have allergies, which they might not be otherwise sensitive, but this one thing affects them disproportionately. And I would use that same terminology when talking about a man who is looking to manage his state. Sometimes you could have somebody that's very even-keeled. He's not very sensitive. But there's this one thing you could almost say his state is allergic to. This one thing happens and he gets really, really angry. Or he becomes really, really elated and focused. Anybody that grew up in the 80s, you put on one of the Rocky soundtracks or something, and there's automatically a state that happens. That is a tool that we use to drive our state one way or the other, obviously. So what are the common obstacles men face when managing these states? Number one, they're very sensitive. It doesn't take much to get them distracted. It doesn't take much to make them less capable than they were the moment prior. And usually the sensitivity comes from some sort of reaction to a thought, to an abstraction, something that isn't real. You got a certain amount of work that you have to do during the day, physical work. You got to, mow the lawn, and it's 3 hours of work. And then you hear that somebody you really like, something bad happened to. Suddenly your state is lowered, and this seems so much more of a task than it did prior to hearing that news. We know it's the same amount of work, but because our state is lower, we find it that much more overwhelming. When we are sensitive to stressors, they will take over our state. Now, I will say The more we can keep our state elevated, the more likely the after state stays above our prior default state. In other words, in order to become less sensitive, more productive, less vulnerable to stresses that we may encounter, the easier it's going to be for us to maintain that, right? So, common obstacles men face when managing their state: sensitivity. Another thing is the philosophy, an individual's relationship with any of these dynamics. You have some people, like some men, that'll walk around and because their cathartic formulas are emotionally based, they see themselves as doing themselves a disservice if they aren't sensitive. Because to them, and I'll use the ditch metaphor to articulate this a little bit more, they're like, well, I need to climb out of the ditch if I'm in it, with absolutely no regard for whether they should have dug the ditch in the first place. So they have these very cathartic emotional, reactions and coping mechanisms to stress, but they never hold themselves accountable for changing the very nature of the relationship with the stressor. I too agree that if you are in a ditch, an emotional ditch, you need to find your way out of it. But concurrent to that belief, I also advocate for an individual being less likely to dig the ditch in the first place. It doesn't mean that we're not supposed to feel. It doesn't mean that we're not supposed to be emotional. There's preference and the pursuit of preference. The pursuit of preference is very logic-based. It's very observational-based. It's very physics-based. But preference, it's all emotion. Who you are is all emotion. I like vanilla instead of chocolate. I like basketball instead of soccer. I like all of these preferential decisions where there are other people that just as easily pick the opposite of you. We understand that that's fine and it makes sense because it's preference-based. So much of what we do and who we choose to be is preference-based, and that's fine. But my argument is not for everybody to sort of be this monolithic individual where it's like, everybody's a fucking Minecraft character that looks the same, walks the same, acts the same. No, my argument is for always pursuing a more productive state, a higher level of state, being less susceptible to the whims of circumstance or the intentions of others, right? You don't want to be the guy that's focused, and then somebody who is arguably a loser interacts with you, and suddenly you're a loser too for a couple of hours because he put you in a bad mood. You want to be resilient to that. An example I use of that to illustrate that one point that I just made is the traveling professional athlete. Could be basketball, baseball, football, whatever sport. When they're on when they're the visitor and the home crowd is there, the things that they have to hear from the home crowd, it's just a matter of doing the job at that point. Like, they don't take these things personally. Why don't they take these things personally? Because they have a mission. One of the obstacles men have managing the state, they don't have a mission. So by default, everything becomes personal because without a mission, their mission winds up being in a good mood. It winds up maintaining an elated state, a high energy state, but it's not anchored to anything, right? If you are focused, if you are, somebody you love is drowning, you know how to swim, they don't. You jump in. Who you want to be, that version of yourself you want to be when you get in that water, is the highest state that you could manage. But the context of the scenario is the mission that's in front of you, which is saving your loved one. You don't have to be fucking giggling when you're doing it. You don't have to be laughing and smiling when you're doing it. That does not equate to a more productive outcome. A more productive outcome in that circumstance is much easily observed as being more focused, operating with more intention. If you don't have a mission, you have nothing to be focused and intentional with other than just keeping a high level of energy. If nothing's going on, I just want to be laughing, in other words. And that's how a lot of people conduct their lives, right? 2 on Tom. What's up, brother man? Good to see you. That's right. Jamie says their mission becomes reactionary, dictated by circumstance. Absolutely right. That's what happens. A mission is being tethered to a target. You don't know if you're off mission if you don't have one, right? If you are zeroing in a rifle, it is not how straight it moves or this. Like, you use a target and your ability to access that target as the context in which we determine whether or not we're zeroed in, whether or not this is accurate. There needs to be that target. Well, when an individual has a mission, it's very easy to understand what the elevated state is from moment to moment, because it's whatever makes them more productive in the pursuit of that mission, right? And so on top says, moods are for babies. Oh man, it's so perfect. Now here's the thing: when somebody is focused on their mood, you have to understand that they're not focused on something else. Now, if they're focused on their mood, it might denote that they need to be in a good mood in order to be functional. That is a vulnerability for a man. Babies, by contrast, as illustrated perfectly by Tuan Tom's quote, do not have any such mission other than communicating that they need to be burped, they need to eat, they shit their pants, or any other discomfort that they're trying to communicate to sort of initiate some sort of response from the mother. Their mission is really, reduced to moods by observers. But we understand even babies, like they're trying to get some shit done. They just have absolutely no regard for anything else other than that. Right? So when you see an individual who is, overly sensitive, and in addition to being overly sensitive, his cathartic rituals, in other words, how he navigates out of the ditch, is also somewhat destructive. We see somebody who has a cap on their level of capability, because not only they're super sensitive, but they also cause damage when they get back, when they try to get back to their default state, right? They think everybody's, talking about them and insulting them, so they become very, very rageful. And then how they deal with that is they start shooting people. It's like, all right, way to make a bad situation worse, right? And so they are two different aspects of dealing with stress, but each one independently needs to be improved. And there is a vulnerability that exists when either one of them is deficient, right? Tom says, when someone shares their mood with me, I like to tell them that it's none of my business. Oh, there's a reason why we get along, Tuan. All right, so next one. All right, where do good moods and bad moods fit in? I think I covered that, and I'm going through the questions from this morning's email. Next, the last thing that I put here, the last question: how can our 4 zones be improved? Well, number one, I want you to look at them, right? I want you to understand them. You don't have to memorize them and study them and apply them on a daily basis. You just have to at least install the framework to hold yourself accountable to what the framework is designed to reveal. So again, I'm going to go over the 4 zones. You have your default state, right? And this is the 4 zones of state. You have your default state. Your default state is, for lack of a better phrase, the running average, right? The running average. It's who, when you show up today, who everybody that knows you expects you to be. It's who you expect yourself to be. It might be who you understand yourself to be, without thinking of something, high state or low state. It's just your default, right? So that's the first zone. The next zone is an elevated state. Elevated is one state, reduced is the other. But elevated or reduced applies to your ability to be productive and pursue mission. So an elevated state means an elevated level of efficacy, effectiveness, capability, focus, intent, any variable, any quality, any attribute that could be tracked to measure somebody's ability to pursue mission. An elevated state is a net increase in those attributes. You become better at pursuing your mission when your state is elevated. Then the reduced state is the opposite of that. It's something that happens, you become less effective. Now, the elevated state and the reduced state correlate strongly to being in a good mood and a bad mood, but they are not anchored to those ideas. There are times where you could be very destructive, but in a very lighthearted mood. So the context of basically deeds is what we're going to use. I don't care if you're happy, sad. Are you driving yourself towards mission or not? Right? And so we have default, we have elevated, reduced, and the fourth zone is the after state. Now, the after state is describing the state that we're in after the effect of the stressor or whatever amplified, the amplifier of our state. Once that effect wanes off and we start moving back towards default, it is the distance between where we wind up and where our original default was. I'll talk about the metaphor, the analogy that I used one more time. If our default is 0, something happens, and we hit the lotto, I don't know, and we're at a 10. And then the excitement, enthusiasm, focus, everything else that's productive starts to wane. Do we go back down to 0? Or after that huge mountain of surplus, do we go back down to 1? Do we go back down to 2? We have the opportunity after that occurs to have a higher default state. But if after that passes, when we return to our default states, our prior default states, habits, and rituals, then eventually we come back to that equilibrium. So our after matches our default, right? The default state is obviously a running average. If I was battling whether to call it the default state or the, before state, right? So then you have the before state, the after. So the before, high, low, and after. But default is where the average is going to be, the running average at any one point. So if you're somebody who is in a bad mood and doesn't get over it, you're a little bit less after that event. And over time, that will accumulate. And you'll see somebody's life start to spiral downward when that winds up happening. But on the other side of it, when somebody's getting after it and they're making achievements and they're running into bigger opportunities and things that observers would call luck that this individual knows or just a byproduct of his efforts and his focus, they tend to hold on to a little bit more of those elevated states, so their default starts to rise also. Right? So those are the 4 states. Let me see what we got. Grungo, what's up? Tom says, a friend of mine taught me once, it never makes sense to be depressed, to act depressed. It doesn't help in any way. That's right. That's absolutely right. You guys have seen my my complaining flow chart, and briefly it's, anything that you're complaining about, my reaction would be, what are you going to do about it? If you tell me there's nothing you can do about it, then my reply is going to be, well, then shut the fuck up about it if you can do nothing about it. What's the point in dwelling on it? If they say, well, there is something I could do about it, I would say, well, then do it. And then I'd follow up with, did you do it yet? No. Well, then do it. Did you do it? Yes. Well, then just like before, now you can shut the fuck up about it. If we take any circumstance in our life and decide to put it in the middle of a narrative that captures our imagination, that monopolizes the bandwidth of our focus, we're all capable, we're smart enough to distract ourselves every day. If you adopt a philosophy, a manner of dealing with circumstance, however, on the other side of it, where you do not allow a story to be written unless it's an empowering one, unless it's one that's looking to elevate your state, then you have a lot of control over the positive momentum in one's life. A lot of people, they're super sensitive and they do whatever's necessary to get back to their default state, and they think it's a win. It's not a win. You guys have heard me say before, I've introduced and promoted for over a decade publicly now, the ladder model. Everybody should be climbing their ladder. It doesn't matter what rung you're on. It doesn't matter what rung. It's, are you climbing? If you're somebody who is not looking to climb, then you are weak. If you are somebody who rejects climbing, then you are weak. It doesn't matter where you are. It's, are you on the ladder and are you climbing? Because a lot of people get on the ladder and they'll pull themselves out of whatever mess, monopolized whatever chapter of their life they managed to go beyond. But then they're in this new set of circumstances that aren't as stressful as the prior ones. And then they go, you know what? I'm going to stay here. And we call that falling in love with the rung. It's like, no, you have to be a climber. There always has to be more. It doesn't mean we accumulate shit. It doesn't mean we become more influential or we're able to tell more people what to do. It has to do with, what are we capable of doing at our highest level of state? And how do we make sure that we stay there? And the thing is, as you become more powerful, more opportunities always present themselves. So there's no reason to logically think that's ever going to stop. You don't want to be the guy who works 50 years, 40 years, 30 years for a company. You retired, 6 months later, you have a fucking heart attack. You dedicate your life to somebody else's mission. At the end of it, you've accumulated enough resources to finally live yours. Generations past had that paradigm installed, and a lot of them led what they see as very happy lives, following that. I'm not even here to judge it in terms of value. I'm just saying that paradigm no longer makes sense. It's too easy for people to be powerful these days. It's just too easy. Anything that you're suffering from, it's going to be either your fault or not your fault. Right? This is how it is. And when you see somebody suffering through no other body's fault than their own, it's like you respect their decisions to live that life. I'm somebody that, a recovering tyrant, I call myself, right? And the idea is that, I have to first and foremost respect other people's ability and their right to live their own lives. I can help people the way that I want to help people if they're not asking for that help at the same time. A very hard thing to accept for people too is, you could want the best for people. You want to make people comfortable. It's like our children's a great example of this. We want them to be safe, comfortable, have everything they want. But here's the problem. There's a point of diminishing returns. There's a point where you go from making your child safe and giving them opportunity to turning them into an entitled pussy, a cunt, a little bitch. By the way, if you're not listening to my show and you're at work and you don't have headphones on, that's on you. There's plenty of people, good jobs, they provide everything for their kids, and their kids wind up being assholes. The kids wind up being entitled to everything they have. Your kids need to know pressure. They need to know struggle. They need to know respect, not because there's value in the people they're respecting, but because when you are somebody who respects your circumstances and the people around you, you are always capable of learning and becoming more powerful after engaging individuals. To dismiss somebody is to say they have nothing of value. Sometimes people need to be dealt with, but there should be a criteria for that. There shouldn't be if I see something I like, then I'll be respectful. That shouldn't be the default. The default should be, I'm going to be respectful to everybody. But if somebody has proven themselves to be a bad investment, then I'll adjust accordingly. If there's no pressure, there's no power. Right? So that's why we have to keep struggling. If you're somebody who doesn't appreciate the struggle, then you're somebody who rejects anything that's ever made you worth a shit to anybody. It's not about the easy life. It's about being stronger so everything we engage becomes a little bit easier. There's a difference. Right? Aaron says, but it's better up there. Why would you stop even after you made all things better? You have the opportunity to improve things even further, right? Well, and I agree, with the sentiment. The thing is, most people who wind up in a bad, or who start off in a bad circumstance and they manage to transcend that, they choose to define themselves as better than that circumstance, when that circumstance was just temporary. It's something that they were associated with temporarily. It doesn't define the nature of who they are. Right? It's like, when somebody, is in recovery, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. Oh, well, good for you. You're not drinking anymore. How long have you been on the wagon? However you try and politely say it. And if they say, 30 years, it's like, what the fuck are you still calling yourself an alcoholic for? Oh, well, I'll always struggle. It's like, shut the fuck up. Like, I'm not the guy for that. Right. I'm not like, I find it very uncomfortable when I believe in individuals' power more than they do. Right? It's not a comfortable conversation for me. I usually try to get out of them. Oh, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. Oh yeah, terrible. All right, have a nice life. Like, get the fuck away from me, because that shit's contagious. Why? Because I'm always looking at it as an opportunity to overcome, an opportunity to be more. You have individuals that, the thing is, but I need all the stuff. I need to maintain enough focus to keep all the stuff. And then once I have this stuff, I have to spend the rest of my life holding on to it. The stuff could be the car, the house, the TV, the account, the vacations, the jewelry, all the other trivial fucking things. When they don't have anything, they're usually, a lot of those people that eventually acquire those things, before that, they're usually at the best. They're usually at the best version of themselves. They're hungry. They're getting after it. Then they get a little comfortable. Then they start, having the ability, the resources to circumvent obstacles a lot more easily. It's not an argument against becoming more powerful and accumulating those things. It's an argument for continuing to scale the pressure with your level of now scaled capability. There was a point where all of us had a really tough time wiping our asses. We all overcame, though. We mastered it. We're not still looking to define ourselves by that thing we overcame however many years ago. That doesn't define us. That was just a milestone. That was a rite of passage, we could say, to some extent. We've all been there, done that. But what's next? What's next? Do you want to be the guy that peaked in high school? Or the guy that, was on the way up at some point, something happened, and he spends the rest of his life talking about that time he was actually worth a shit? Of course not. Jamie writes, natural systems are also far less humane than human systems. Other people aren't the only things that will fuck you over. You can do everything right. Nature will kill your entire family. That's right. That's right. My father had this saying, you're so smart, you're stupid. He used to say it to me a lot, and I deserved every time he did. But the idea of it is, sometimes we are so fucking smug with our intellects and our big brains and our ability to compute abstraction and et cetera, that we lose sight of the fact that we deserve nothing but physics. That's all we deserve. It doesn't matter what your plans are. You have to understand that everything is just a movement towards probability. I'm going to schedule a picnic this Saturday. When I schedule it, I know full well there could be a blizzard, a storm, some other disaster that happens that's beyond my control. That should be embedded in the relationship I build with this abstract event that's happening days from now. But when it rains, if I lose my mind, it's like, well, what the fuck was I entitled to? Who was I to think that it was impossible to rain? It's like, oh, it sucks, it's going to rain. Well, what was the chance that it was going to rain today? When I set the picnic a month ago, what was the chance it was going to rain today? 100%. Well, how do I know that? Because it's fucking raining. I didn't know that back then. If I knew that, I wouldn't have set it for today. So keep it moving. Whenever there's an obstacle, to mention the obstacle once is to acknowledge it. The second time you mention it is the first complaint. It's not that we can't acknowledge the things that are bad to us. It's just how much complaining do you want to do before you go on to actually solving it? Sometimes you think you could fix something. You think you could solve something. And then after your best efforts, you realize that you can't. Put that shit down and walk away. Don't give it a second thought. Because it turns out it wasn't in your control anyway. It wasn't in your control to begin with. It's always about movement. It's always getting back to movement. It's always getting back to the next thing. What's next? Okay, you did that. What's next? It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that, right? All right, guys, let's call it there. Good talk. I got everything out that I wanted to plan. I wanted to introduce the 4 zones of state to you guys today. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Do me a favor. Like the video. Comment on the video if you can. You guys shit to do like anybody else. I'm not going to sit here begging for anything, but you guys understand the game. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you guys for hanging out with me. I'll be here next week. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.